Intraembryonic mesoderm. Broadly intraembryonic mesoderm, but intraembryonic mesoderm, you know, after the development of intraembryonic coelom, it divides into two parts. Number one, splanchnic mesoderm and somatopluric mesoderm, and it is the splanchnic mesoderm from where heart develops. Now, this is the embryonic disc. This is the embryonic disc, and I am looking from above. That means it is the which layer? Embryonic disc, two-layered embryonic disc. If I look from above, it is epiblast. It is epiblast, and just deep to it lies the hypoblast. Epiblast means it is the floor of the amniotic cavity, and hypoblast means it is the roof of the yolk sac. And here you know, at the caudal part of the first, at the cephalic part, one area develops, circular area, that is known as procaudal plate. Procaudal plate, and at the cephalic end develops linear opacity at the linear area, that is called primitive streak. Primitive streak. Primitive streak. Now, the cephalic end of this streak professors and form a raised area, that is called primitive node. This is called primitive node. One depression appears within the primitive node, that is called known as primitive pit. Now cells of the primitive node proliferates, and it will invaginate into the space between the epiblast and hypoblast, and that will actually form the intraembryonic mesoderm, right? Now, if I cut like this, see here, what I will find? This is the epiblast. This is the hypoblast. Here lies the already notochord has developed. Now here lies it is the position of the primitive streak. From here cells will come and it will fill up this area. That is, it is the intraembryonic mesoderm. Now here one space appears, that is called intraembryonic coelom. This coelom, the most midline and cephalic part of this coelom is known as pericardium. Pericardium means it is the part of the intraembryonic coelom which lies at the cephalic position and just midline. And I have already told you the upper part of this, it has divided this intraembryonic mesoderm into two parts. This one is called somatopluric mesoderm, and this part is splanchnic mesoderm, right? Now, after the head fold, I've already told you, after the head fold, the position will be completely changed. Here you see, it is the roof. Roof is actually formed by the, and floor is formed by the splanchnic. When there will be head fold like this, it will fold like this. When it will fold like this, the whole scenario will be changed. Now floor will be roof and roof will be floor. Now, then suppose here, this is the pericardium. Now it is the roof, it is the floor, and this is after head fold. After head fold. Now this mesoderm and this mesoderm. What will be the name of this mesoderm? What will be the name of this mesoderm? Somatopolic splanchnic. Splanchnic. After the head fold change. At this area, heart will develop. Now, recently, there are two heart field area. One heart field area is called primary heart field area, and another is called secondary heart field area. Now, primary heart field area, what is that? Some cells of the epiblast which lies on either side of the primitive streak, they will migrate and will come to the splanchnic mesoderm. There they will form a horseshoe-shaped distribution. From this horseshoe-shaped distribution it will form, that is called primitive primary heart field area. If you feel, then there is no mention of area, primary heart field. And secondary heart field is developed from the splanchnic mesoderm, which I have already told you. So another cell came from the primitive streak on either side, that is epiblast in origin, that will come and will form the primary heart field. From this primary heart field, you should remember, from this primary heart field, maximum part of the heart will develop. Almost all the chamber of the heart will develop from primary heart field, and rest will develop from the second heart field. Second heart field will develop part of the right atrium and outflow tract of both ventricle. Part of the right ventricle and outflow tract of both ventricle will develop from secondary heart field, and most will develop from the primary heart field. Is clear? Only this much you will remember. All parts of the heart will develop from primary heart field, and secondary heart field will give rise to part of the right ventricle and outflow tract of both ventricles. Thus, and rest will develop from primary heart field. Primary heart field cells, from where it is coming? It is coming from the epiblast, at the caudal part of the epiblast. On either side, it is the caudal part, from the caudal part of the epiblast. Right? Now, there, within the primary heart field, angioblast cell will differentiate. First will be angioblast. That angioblast will form blood vessels, small blood vessels, and that small blood vessels will coalesce to form two heart tube. That is called endothelial heart tube. These two heart tube, that is endothelial heart tube, now they will merge and form a single tube. That is called, this is single tube. This is the cephalic end, this is the caudal end. Cephalic end is known as arterial end, and caudal end is known as venous end. Now, actually this thing was happening during the third week of intrauterine life. It is happening during the third week of intrauterine life. Now, you know, first week From first week of the development, the embryo gets nutrition from where? The embryo gets nutrition from where? Deutoplasm. Deutoplasm means nutritive material stored in the cytoplasm. Fertilized ovum का अंदर जो थोड़ा nutrition था, that is called deutoplasm. From there, from that deutoplasm, they will be nourished. Now, during the second week, at the end of the first week, when it is actually implanting, and from where at the time of the implantation, the eroded material of the endometrium will diffuse into the fertilized ovum or blastocyst, and they will nourish it. And during the third week, this nourishment is not sufficient. As it is gradually increasing, this nutrition is not sufficient, so there is the need of development of heart system or cardiovascular system. So it developed during the third week. So first develop this heart tube, endothelial heart tube. Now this heart tube will show some dilatation like this. A series of dilatation will appear along the heart tube. Now heart tube will look like this. The cephalic end and caudal end will remain bifurcated. Now they are known as, this is the primary ventricle, this is primary atrium, this is known as sinus venosus, this is bulbar part, this is bulbar part. So from cranial to caudal, this is the bulbar part, this is primary ventricle, primary atrium and sinus venosus. This bulbar part will again divide into three parts. This is the proximal third, middle third and distal third. This proximal third didn't have any special name. It retains its old name, that is bulbar part. Middle third is known as conus cordis. And the distal part is known as truncus arteriosus. এটা খুব ইম্পর্টেন্ট, এটা মুখস্থ রাখবে একদম, এখান থেকে সব ডেভেলপ হবে। Heart tube will show a series of dilatation. Now it is known as, this is the primary ventricle, primary atrium, this is the sinus venosus, this is the caudal end or venous end, this is the arterial end, or cephalic end. This is the arterial end. Arterial end. And this is the caudal end. Or venous end. The bifurcated part or unfused part is known as horn of the sinus venosus. They are known as horn of the sinus venosus. It is the left horn, that is the right horn. Right horn of sinus venosus. Left horn of sinus venosus. Now at the arterial end, the truncus arteriosus here you see, it is also bifurcated. Actually, this end communicates with the dorsal aorta. First dorsal aorta developed. There are two dorsal aorta, and this end actually communicates with the dorsal aorta, and this end passes by the side of the foregut. By the side of the foregut and the first pharyngeal arch artery. This is the first pharyngeal arch artery. They will communicate with the dorsal aorta by passing by the side of the developing foregut. Now, from this part, which part of heart will develop? You will remember this. This is the main thing. Now, cephalic end, which is arterial end, will actually communicate with the dorsal aorta. Dorsal aorta developed on either side of the notochord, on the dorsal wall of the yolk sac. First, it was developed first. First, it was developed on either side of the What are you talking? बोलो मैंने क्या बोला बोलो अभी क्या बोला On the dorsal wall of the yolk sac first develop two dorsal aorta on either side of the notochord. Now this dorsal aorta will communicate with the arterial end of the truncus arteriosus through what? Through the pharyngeal arch artery. First pharyngeal arch artery. There are 6 pharyngeal arch. It has been already taught. Pharyngeal arch. So first pharyngeal arch artery, it communicates with the dorsal aorta. Right? Now, at the name, you know primary ventricle. Now, between the primary ventricle and bulbar cordis, externally this sulcus is known as bulboventricular sulcus. This sulcus is known as bulboventricular sulcus. Right? And this part, ventricle and atrium, it is known as atrioventricular canal. This communication between ventricle and atrium, this communication is known as atrioventricular canal or AV canal. AV canal. Right? And this communication between the sinus venosus and atrium, this is known as sino-aortic orifice. Sino-aortic Sinoatrial orifice. This sulcus, externally known as bulboventricular sulcus. This canal is known as AV canal, and this orifice is known as sinoatrial orifice. Internally, this part. Internally, if you see this part is known as. Internally, it is known as bulboventricular ridge. Bulboventricular ridge. Bulboventricular ridge. You will remember all these terms. Each term has got significance. All terms you should remember. And you will draw it first and will regularly study this chart, this heart tube, right? Now, which chamber of the heart developed from this heart tube? Number 1, from primary ventricle. If you see the adult heart, within adult heart you will see there is some rough part and there is some smooth part. Within ventricle you will get rough part because of the ridges. Now, from the primary ventricle, rough part of the left ventricle will develop. You will remember. From the primary ventricle, rough part of the left ventricle will develop. Now, there is another ventricle, right ventricle. Right ventricle will develop from where? It will develop from bulbar part. Proximal third of the bulbar part. From the proximal part of the bulbar part, this part, it will give rise to the rough part of the right ventricle. Origin left ventricle will develop from the primary ventricle, and rough part of the right ventricle will develop from the proximal third of the bulbar part. Right? Now, a smooth part of the ventricle, generally it is known as the outflow tract. Now, this outflow tract of both ventricle will develop from conus caudis. That means middle third. Middle third of the bulbar part is known as conus caudis. That will give rise to outflow tract of both ventricle. Right? তাহলে conus caudis, it will give rise to the outflow tract of both ventricle. Now come to the primary atrium. Primary atrium will give rise to, here also atrium also has got two parts, smooth part and rough part. Now primary atrium, here it will give rise to rough part of both atrium, right and left. Right and left, both atrium. And a smooth part will develop from the sinus venosus. Sinus venosus will give rise to sinus venosus along with right horn. They will give rise to the body of the sinus venosus plus right horn of the sinus venosus will give rise to a smooth part of the right atrium. smooth part of the right atrium. Right? Now, the distal part here, distal part of the, which is known as truncus arteriosus. The distal part at the arterial end, the distal part of the bulbar cordis, it is known as truncus arteriosus. That will give rise to pulmonary trunk and ascending aorta. Pulmonary trunk and ascending aorta. আর কিছু বাকি আছে হার্টের? Now again I am repeating from the cephalic end or arterial end. Truncus arteria will give rise to pulmonary trunk and ascending aorta. Now middle part, conus cordis, will give rise to outflow tract of both ventricle. Now bulbar part, that means proximal third of the bulbar cordis, it will give rise to rough part of the right ventricle, and primary ventricle, this chamber, will give rise to rough part of the left ventricle. Primary atrium will give rise to rough part of both atrium, primary atrium, and sinus venosus with right horn of the, with its right horn, it will be absorbed within the right atrium and it will give rise to a smooth part of the right atrium. I expected that you should ask me one question, but you didn't ask. You did not ask me, sir, smooth part of left atrium, from which source it develops. You did not ask me. It will develop from pulmonary veins. By the absorption of the pulmonary veins, the smooth part of the left atrium will develop. Now, there are two important things. That is the development of interatrial septum and development of the interventricular septum. That we will discuss in next class. Today, actually, you should memorize it only. This part, most important. Again, I am repeating. Again and again, I am repeating so that you can remember it. First of all, you should know, broadly you should know from where heart develops. Broadly, intra-embryonic mesoderm. This is not sufficient. You have to specify from which part, from the cardiogenic part, heart develops. Cardio means heart. So from the cardiogenic part of the intra-embryonic mesoderm, it will develop. Now, always you will ask yourself, where, what, how, when, then you will get answer. Now, from which part of the intra-embryonic mesoderm heart develops? Heart develops from the splanchnic mesoderm of the intra-embryonic mesoderm. Splanchnic mesoderm of the intra-embryonic mesoderm. Where it lies, splanchnic mesoderm, how it is formed? It formed due to the appearance of the intra-embryonic coelom. When coelom means space, when space develops within the intra-embryonic mesoderm, the mesoderm is split into two parts. One part actually lies above and one part below. Which lies above means it will form the floor of the amniotic cavity, and one part lies below. That means it will form the roof of the yolk sac. Which forms the roof of the yolk sac is known as splanchnic mesoderm, and which forms the floor of the amniotic cavity is known as somatofluidic mesoderm. So from this splanchnic mesoderm, heart will develop. This is not sufficient. You have to know more information. Now, some cells from the epiblast, caudal part of the epiblast. Caudal part, you know, at the caudal part lies the primitive streak. So around the primitive streak, some cells of epiblast will pass through the primitive streak and they will come to the splanchnic mesoderm. There they will form primary heart field. From that primary heart field will develop two endothelial tube. Right? This endothelial tube ultimately is fused from cephalic to caudal and will form a single tube. This single tube later on will show a series of dilatation, and they are named, I have already told you, they have been named this primary ventricle, primary atrium, bulbar cordis and sinus venosus. Right? Now, when another thing you should know, suppose this is the pericardium. Here lies the heart tube. Heart tube has developed from the primary heart field, and here lies the splanchnic mesoderm. That splanchnic mesoderm will condense to form myoepicardial mantle. Here we will develop myoepicardial mantle. Myoepicardial mantle will develop from the splanchnic mesoderm. This is the myoepicardial mantle. Myoepicardial mantle. Initially, there is a jelly between the endothelial tube and myoepicardial mantle. Some jelly-like substance here lies. That is called cardiac jelly. Cardiac jelly. From this myoepicardial mantle, heart will gradually will be introduced into the epicardium. You know, epicardium will form the outer layer of the heart, and while it will be introduced, this myoepicardial mantle also will engulf the heart tube. Now, from this myoepicardial mantle, what develops? Myo means muscle, the muscle of the heart, and epicardial means epicardium of the heart. The muscle of the heart and epicardium of the heart will develop from the myoepicardial mantle. What is epicardium? Epicardium is the visceral layer of the pericardium. Epicardium is a visceral layer of the pericardium. Now, this endothelial tube, will give rise to only the endocardium. এই যে এতক্ষণ ধরে যেটা বললাম, এই যে টিউবটা, এই যে টিউব, it will only form the inner lining, endocardium. You know, heart has got from inside outwards endocardium, myocardium and epicardium. So, endothelial tube will develop endocardium, and this myoepicardial mantle, which is coming from the splanchnic mesoderm, they will form the muscle as well as epicardium, myoepicardial. That's why it has been so named, right? And most outside there is a fibrous pericardium. That fibrous pericardium will develop from somatofluidic mesoderm. ये तो splanchnic था, वो है somatofluidic mesoderm. Most outer part of the fibrous pericardium will develop. Right? Is it clear?